While some Middle Eastern economies are thriving, others are facing obstacles to growth, including inflation, lower than ideal oil prices, and war. And I'm joined by IMF Director Jihad Azour, who's going to discuss the IMF's latest regional economic outlook. Thank you so much for being here today, Mr. Azour. I want to start with the wars in Gaza and in Lebanon. Once these wars end, what is the timeline for economic recovery? What is the best and the worst case scenario?
Well, first of all, we are following up the situation with great concern about the human suffering and the level of damage that has been inflicted in both situations. I think what is needed today is to stop the hostilities, address the human suffering of people, deal with loss of lives, loss of livelihoods, provide social protection to those who have been displaced, and then start preparing for the future. Unfortunately, the high level of uncertainty makes it difficult to think the day after. And therefore, what we need to do today is to take care of the situation as is, and then start at the same time preparing for the future.
And what is the potential timeline for economic recovery once these wars end?
Well, it's a very good question. Historically, the region has been slow in recovering from conflict. It takes the region 10 years to recover, and then even after 10 years, the level of GDP per capita is minus 10% than the original point, which is much slower than other parts of the world where countries recover faster. And this is why it's very important to think about how to bring back better the reconstruction this time.
Absolutely. And Egypt says that it wants to renegotiate the terms of its $8 billion IMF loan owing to the loss of revenues, primarily from the Suez Canal disruptions. What is your take on Egypt's $8 billion loan and how to deal with it going forward?
Well, let me first say that the fund has been supportive to Egypt throughout the last years with the various programs in order to help Egypt address a certain number of external shocks, strengthen its resilience, and also bring the economy to a higher level of growth. And we have recently, because of the impact of the war, especially on the revenues from the Suez Canal, we have scaled up the program that was $3 billion. We increased it to $8 billion last April when we did the first and second review. The program is designed to help Egypt increase its resilience against external shocks, but also address some imbalances that existed, especially inflation, as well as also the high level of debt and deficit. But the program has an ambition. The ambition is to create higher growth that creates more jobs and allow the Egyptian economy to be export-driven. And this is the third pillar, which is structural reforms. Therefore, we believe that this program is still the right program that helps Egypt address the shocks, but also prepares the future. And we believe that the results that we are seeing, the gradual decline in inflation, the improvement in growth, will provide Egypt with the right, I would say, platform for stabilization and the right platform when we increase the level of structural reforms of recovery.
And IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva will travel to Egypt in the days ahead. She will meet with President Sisi. What will they discuss?
Well, of course, we'll discuss the regional development, especially that Egypt plays an important role in stabilizing the region, and the region is important to the fund. The fund has been supporting actively the region over the last 4 years. We provided $47 billion of financing. They will be discussing the commitment of the fund to support Egypt during this period. And also they will be discussing the future of the region, especially what is needed in order to help the region recover faster and to reconstruct better.
There's no doubt that the IMF has supported Egypt. At the same time, Egypt has done everything the IMF requested. It floated its currency, it removed subsidies on fuel and on food. Millions of Egyptians still cannot afford the cost of living. What is the solution to this problem?
Let me first correct something. This program has been designed by the Egyptian government in order to address some important issues that Egypt has put as priorities, and the fund is supporting. The fund is supporting through this program to bring confidence back, and it helped also attract important capital flows from different sources. It brought confidence back also to the market. This program is designed also to provide fiscal space for the government to spend more socially, to alleviate the pressure on the low-income people and the most affected groups. There are several social programs that are designed to that. And three, this program is designed to allow Egypt to accelerate the reforms. Without this financing, without this program, it will take Egypt longer to address all these challenges. Therefore, this is a support program for a set of priorities that are designed by the Egyptian authorities, supported by the fund, and with the fund came a large group of bilateral donors and multilateral institutions to support Egypt.
Okay, let's move to GCC economies. Now, you're forecasting an average oil price of $81 a barrel this year and $72 in 2025. What impact do you think the lower oil prices that we're seeing now are going to have this year and next? I mean, oil is at a 1 month low today, isn't it?
Well, in terms of impact of the oil price on projections for the oil producing countries, you have to add to this the quantity of production. And the extension of the OPEC Plus agreement led to the downward revision of the growth prospect for the oil sector. I think the good news for the oil exporting countries, especially at the GCC, is the performance of the non-oil sector, who drove up the economy in the last few years and expected to be in the lead also for the next couple of years. This is the result of several reforms to diversify economies in the GCC and focus on fast-growing sectors. However, I think the oil price today is subject to different variables, or it's impacted by different moves. Some of them are related to the geopolitical tension. Some of them are related to the global supply and demand and the global outlook that affects also the price of oil as well as also the price of gas.
As you say, GCC economies are seeing higher FDI inflows than ever before. Their diversification efforts are paying off. What are your thoughts on the GCC's diversification efforts, particularly Saudi Arabia's, for example, in its Vision 2030?
Well, of course, if we look at the performance over the last few years, and despite several shocks, from COVID-19 to the shock of the war in Ukraine, inflation, and so on, the Saudi economy, as well as also with other economies, were able to maintain a high level of non-oil GDP. Back in 2022, the Saudi economy was the fastest growing among the G20 countries. This is the result of three things: the investment in new projects, the structural reforms that help increase the productivity in the public sector and the private sector, has helped to increase women's participation in the economy and also led to a decline in unemployment, especially for the youth. It's the result also of opening new sectors like tourism, leisure, and other sectors, and also to increase the diversification internationally by promoting new partnerships with Asia, with Africa, with Europe, which has, in this global fragmented economic world, provided some diversification and benefits to those economies. And
what are your thoughts on the UAE's diversification efforts and growth numbers here for this year and next?
2024, the UAE economy will be the fastest growing in the GCC. I think the way that UAE dealt with the COVID-19 shock and then the aftermath of that showed the capacity of the economy to adapt and to be in the lead in transforming itself. One of the first to use AI, for example, for healthcare and for public services. One of the fastest growing on the new sectors. And this is why currently UAE is the fastest growing economy in the GCC.
What are the ways in which they can improve the business environment, these GCC economies who need to attract more FDI inflows to achieve their diversification? What are some tangible steps they can take?
Well, this is an important issue. The way to address it is first by improving the productive capacity of the economy, the productivity of capital as well as also of labor, deepening the financial markets. But also GCC countries would benefit from greater integration internally. Trade, financial integration are two avenues that could help grow the non-oil sector in the GCC. And three is the strategy of connectivity, playing the role of connector globally, also will help GCC economies to grow.
And coming back to the regional economic outlook, which we are discussing today essentially, you have downgraded your growth expectations for MENA this year by 0.6 percentage points to 2.1%, but you expect a rebound next year with 4% growth. What will drive that growth next year?
Well, first, what drove the downward revision is the uncertainty and the extension of the OPEC Plus agreement of voluntary reduction of oil productions. We expect that this agreement will gradually be revisited as it's planned, and then we will see production of oil going up for the oil exporting countries. This will help the oil growth, the growth in the oil sector to recover. On the non-oil, we expect the situation to gradually normalize, and also that the overall economic outlook globally will play in favor of the region.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the potential outcome of the US election. And we know that during the recent World Bank IMF meetings, there was concern among finance ministers about a Trump win, because there's concern that he will push massive tariffs. He will essentially issue trillions of dollars in debt. What impact could a Trump presidency have on the global economy?
Well, it's not for me to predict or to answer this question, who will win the election and what will be the policies. I think the priorities today in the global economy is how to address the successive series of shocks that weaken the economy globally. We are currently at a level of debt that globally that exceed the $100 trillion, and a world that is being progressively going into erecting barriers. The number of trade barriers or trade actions have reached this year 3,000 actions compared to 1,000 maybe back in 2019. Therefore, what the world needs today is global leadership to address some of the issues that have emerged over the past few years.
What are the specific measures that can be taken to deal with this issue of massive debt and modest growth in the world economy?
Well, it's a very important question. First, address the debt creation, which requires to have a growth-friendly fiscal consolidation that would reduce the new amount of debt. Two is, now that we have addressed the issue of inflation, to start seeing interest rates going down, because recently it was not an issue of debt, especially for emerging economy. It became an issue of debt service with the increase in the debt cost. Three is to create more growth. Creating more growth requires to share knowledge, share the market, and also share the prosperity. And this is something that in the past, we saw decades of convergence. I think it's important to go back to a new model where we use technology to also use our common good to address some of the important issues for the future, like climate, and also to bring our community, global community together to help countries who cannot address their issues alone, especially countries who are faced with shocks of war, shock of climate, countries who have a high level of debt, who need the assistance of the international community.
Certainly a challenge to forecast during these extremely uncertain times. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.